Chapter 10, Jewish Fables by E. Michael Jones. Super OxyContin. When the original patent for OxyContin was about to expire in the 1980s, the scientists at Purdue came up with a dose that was 8 times stronger than the original pill, creating the equivalent of a nuclear weapon in terms of narcotic firepower. Soon the same people who had gotten hooked on the drug were grinding up multiple tablets of the new Super OxyContin and injecting it into their veins to maintain the original high, which had worn off, as original highs always do. Graduating to the needle meant that those who began their addiction to OxyContin under a doctor's supervision for things like athletic injuries soon moved on to heroin, which at a certain point became cheaper than the drug Purdue Pharma was peddling. Within 5 years of its release in 1995, OxyContin was earning Purdue Pharma $1 billion a year. During this time, quote, there were signs that people were abusing it in rural areas like Maine and Appalachia. If you ground the pills up and snorted them or dissolved them in liquid and injected them, you could override the time-release mechanism and deliver a huge narcotic payload all at once. As more and more doctors prescribed OxyContin for an ever greater range of symptoms, some patients began selling their pills on the black market, where the street price was $1 a milligram. Doctors who were easily manipulated by their patients or corrupted by the money in play set up so-called pill mills, pain clinics that thrived on a wholesale business of issuing OxyContin prescriptions. End quote. The Sackler family's $13 billion net worth was accumulated from a load of human suffering and death which is only now coming to light. Quote, since 1999, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses related to OxyContin and other prescription opioids. Many addicts, finding prescription painkillers too expensive or too difficult to obtain, have turned to heroin. According to the American Society of Addiction Medicine, 4 out of 5 people who try heroin today started with prescription painkillers. The most recent figures from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggest that 145 Americans now die every day from opioid overdoses. 145 Americans die every day, every single day. Opioid overdoses. End quote. In Pike County, Kentucky, where Purdue Pharma reached an out-of-court settlement, 29% of the country's residents said that they or their families knew someone who had died as a result of using OxyContin. At the time of the lawsuit, nearly half of the players on the 1997 Pikeville High School football team had died of overdoses or were addicted. In some parts of West Virginia, 10% of newborns come into this world addicted to opioids. The story of the Sackler family gives new meaning to Harari's celebration of drugs as the only source of lasting happiness. It also puts in stark relief the difference between the Jewish heaven on earth based on Darwinism's science, libido dominandi, and dope and St. Augustine's city of God. We now have a clear idea of the slavery which Harari's Jewish utopia entails. Can anyone in his right mind choose that over a social order based on logos as articulated by the tradition of the natural law which was abandoned at around the time of the scientific revolution? According to that concept, quote, moral laws are based on human nature, on the way we are. As a consequence, morality is a function of human nature, so that reason can discover valid moral principles by looking at the nature of humanity and society, no matter where on earth. This means that what we ought to do is related to what we are. You shall not kill, for instance, is based on the real value of human life and the need to preserve it. You shall not commit adultery is based on the real value of marriage. End quote. There is, in other words, no radical dichotomy between the mind and the universe. Logos is common to both, or as Aquinas would say, the light of reason is placed by nature in every man to guide him in his acts. This means that, quote, the laws of morality are not rules that we invent, but principles that we discover, similar in a way to the laws of a science such as physiology. Just as our psychological nature makes it necessary for us to eat certain foods and to breathe oxygen for our bodies to be healthy, so our moral nature makes certain moral rules and laws necessary for our souls to be healthy. Not only is there a physical order in nature, but also a moral order. End quote. The order of creation is eminently rational. True science could not exist if it were not. Science and mathematics are not possible in the Darwinian universe which Professor Harari is proposing as paradise. They are only possible if we accept the proposition that, quote, the most fundamental assumption of the rational mind is that the world perceived through reason is true, that the world itself is reasonable. This presupposes that the mind interpreting the world through reason is somehow apprehending the world as it actually exists, end quote. The mysterious conformity here between the rationality of our minds and the rationality found in the world around us has a very simple explanation. Both were brought into being by an intelligent, rational, orderly, and law-giving creator God who made this universe the way it is. Creation could not exist without a creator. Creation is rational because the creator is the epitome of all rationality. God is Logos, and Logos is God. The mind of man fits into that order like a key into a lock. Quote, only the existence of God can explain that there is a universe, that there is order in the universe, that this universe is intelligible, that there are universal laws of nature, and that there are universal moral laws. This is the only way we can take the world as something created according to an intelligible plan accessible to the human intellect through the natural light of reason. This is the only way we can understand the natural order and moral order of this universe. Because there is a creator, we have not only a rational lawgiver who guarantees order, intelligibility, and predictability, but also a moral lawgiver who guarantees decency, integrity, conscience, responsibility, justice, and human dignity that comes with human rights. End quote. In spite of his allegiance to Darwin, philosophical materialism, dope, and even dopier science, Professor Harari can't seem to get Genesis out of his mind. He ends his book not as the disinterested scientist, but by taking on the role of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who told Eve, "Ye shall be like gods," if she and her husband followed his instructions. Harari titles the afterword to his book, "The Animal That Became a God," arguing that man can become divine by following what Harari calls intelligent design. That concludes Chapter 10, Jewish Fables by E. Michael Jones.